Welcome back to the Resolution Room, where we don't just talk about workplace issues, we untangle them with clarity, courage, and maybe a little side eye when needed. I'm your host, Robert Holmes, and this is part 2 of our deep dive into microaggressions at work. In our last episode, we explored what microaggressions are and how they quietly chip away at trust, belonging, and psychological safety. Today, we're moving from theory to reality, real-world examples, and what it actually takes to tackle these slights head-on. Because, let's be clear, awareness is a start, but it's not the finish line. Combating microaggressions requires actions on all fronts. Your awareness, our conversations, and organizational systems that actually back up the DEI posters in the break room. We'll break down what best practices from HR, psychology, and leadership tell us. Respect and inclusion have to be lived daily. When that happens, microaggressions have less oxygen. And when they do show up, a strong, inclusive culture knows how to respond with support, accountability, and growth. Let's get into it. It's one thing to talk about microaggressions in theory, but what do they look like in actual workplaces? Let's explore a few real and a couple of high-profile examples to illustrate how microaggressions play out on the ground and the fallout they can lead to. Our first example will be the well-intended manager with the not-so-equal approach. A few years ago, a Jewish employee at a New York organization began noticing subtle but troubling patterns. In meetings and discussions, certain comments would pop up, like a colleague remarking that there are too many white Jewish CEOs in positions of power. It's time to get them out. Her supervisor once mused she didn't want an old Jewish woman running a multicultural department when the employee suggested a Jewish colleague for an open role. Ouch. On top of that, company events inadvertently excluded Jewish staff. For example, scheduling an all-staff retreat on a major Jewish holiday. And leadership dragged their feet when she proposed starting a Jewish employees resource group, despite having ERGs for other demographics. Individually, each action or comment might be brushed off as a misunderstanding or oversight, but together, they painted a picture that made the employee feel her identity was unwelcome. When she voiced concerns about these microaggressions and pushed for the ERG, she suddenly started receiving poor performance reviews out of the blue and was eventually fired under the pretext of unsatisfactory performance. Interestingly, she was even offered a severance package if she agreed not to sue, despite the company claiming she was terminated for cause. She declined that hush money and filed a complaint. The case that followed alleged religious discrimination and retaliation, and a court found the circumstances fishy enough to let her lawsuit proceed. Noting the timing and inconsistency, firing for performance, but offering severance, which was against policy for performance-based terminations, and then suddenly showing interest in the Jewish ERG once the complaint hit. This case is a textbook example of how microaggressions can escalate. What started as a subtle workplace slight and bias ended up costing the organization clearly in morale, talent, and legal fees. Here's another example. Disability microaggressions leading to a hostile environment. Consider an employee at a university who has type 2 diabetes. She needed some reasonable accommodations, flexible breaks to manage blood sugar, occasional work from home days post-treatment. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, she was at a higher risk. So she took some leave under FMLA, the Family and Medical Leave Act. None of these are inappropriate. They are her rights. However, her coworkers and even supervisors began showing resentment. They make snide remarks implying she was getting special treatment, rolled her eyes when she took a break to eat, and one supervisor even routinely forgot to pass along meeting info, effectively sidelining her, perhaps as some twisted payback for taking leave. She described being yelled at and written up for minor attendance issues that were actually related to her medical needs and feeling constantly on thin ice. These are classic microaggressions. Not one single incident was a blatant, "We don't want you because of your diabetes," but the pattern, death by 1,000 insulin needles, you might grimly joke, created a hostile atmosphere. She eventually filed a lawsuit claiming the workplace had become toxic with microaggression, harassment, and retaliation. In this case, the court recognized that supervisors were among the perpetrators of the microaggressions, yelling at her for using leave she was entitled to, and the employer hadn't done anything to stop it. A judge allowed her claims of ADA-based hostile work environment and FMLA retaliation to move forward, affirming that repeated microaggressions based on disability can indeed rise to the level of unlawful harassment. The lesson here for employers: Ignoring those little jabs and jokes at your peril, if an employee's health condition, or race, or gender is the butt of constant workplace sniping, it's not only wrong, it's legally actionable. Here's another situation: the case of the missing awareness. Not all stories end with a lawsuit or a bang. Many microaggressions fester in workplaces simply as part of the culture until someone leaves or a blowup happens. For example, there was a case of a black woman working in an office where she was the only person of color on her team. She reported that a white colleague had a habit of shaking her finger in this woman's face during disagreements, a gesture she felt was demeaning and had racial undertones. Think stereotypical scolding of a sassy black woman. She complained to HR. An HR solution was to set up a peer mediation session between her and the colleague. After the session, nothing really changed in the environment. If anything, she felt she was now labeled a troublemaker. A month later, she was terminated with the generic explanation that her services were no longer needed. She filed a Title VII lawsuit claiming she'd been subjected to racially motivated microaggressions and that her firing was retaliation. However, in court, her claim didn't succeed, largely because she struggled to provide enough specific evidence of differential treatment. The vague, toxic environment she described, lacking concrete examples beyond the finger wagging and a few general statements, wasn't enough for the judge to see a clear pattern of race-based discrimination. The case was dismissed, with the lesson that while microaggressions are real, employees need to document them clearly if they plan to take formal action. This story highlights two things: the importance of having given employees safe avenues to report and address microaggressions before it gets to a termination or lawsuit, and B, how crucial it is to listen and document as an HR practitioner, because these situations are often he said, she said, unless there's a record. How about turning a microaggression into a teachable moment? For a more positive example, consider a scenario many have experienced. In a team meeting, a male manager says to a junior female analyst after a presentation, "Great job. I never would have guessed you were fresh out of college. You spoke so professionally." The comment was meant to be flattering, but later, the analyst reflects that none of the young male analysts on the team seem to get the same surprise compliment when they do well. She mentions this to her mentor, who happens to relate to the manager. Now, here's where effective leadership comes in. The manager could have been defensive. "I was just complimenting her, geez." But instead, he takes it to heart. He seeks out the analyst and says something along the lines of, "I heard that my comment came across differently than I intended. I'm sorry. I realized saying I was surprised might have felt like I doubted your abilities. In truth, your work was excellent, period. And I'm impressed. Thank you for speaking up." The analyst, in turn, shares her perspective. This kind of honest dialogue turns a microaggression into an opportunity for greater mutual understanding. In fact, research by MIT's Basima Tefwik suggests that under the right conditions, the aftermath of a microaggression can actually lead to a stronger relationship between the parties. In this case, the manager not only learned to be more mindful with his words, but the trust with his junior employee grew because she saw he was willing to listen and change. It's a great example of how, with humility and communication, a slip up doesn't have to poison the well. It can, in time, even improve it. These examples illustrate that microaggressions are happening in real workplaces every day, from campuses to corporate offices to nonprofit organizations. Sometimes they end up in court or in the news. More often, they end up in someone's resignation letter or just their daily misery. The silver lining is that when organizations and individuals proactively address these issues, even the negative can be turned around, which brings us to our next and most important section: what can we do about it? Okay, enough doom and gloom. Let's talk solutions. How can HR professionals, leaders, coaches, and all of us as colleagues identify microaggressions when they occur, respond in the moment, and ultimately reduce their occurrence by improving our workplace culture? There's no magic wand, but there are evidence-based strategies and best practices from diversity and inclusion experts, organizational psychologists, conflict resolution specialists, and any leadership coach that can make a real difference. Let's break it down into a few key approaches. First, building awareness and educating everyone. The first step is recognizing a microaggression when it happens. Organizations should invest in training and education around what microaggressions are, with concrete examples relevant to their workplace. This isn't about finger pointing or creating thought police. It's about helping well meaning people realize how certain phrases or actions can be hurtful. Many people really have no idea that saying you people or continually mispronouncing someone's name can offend. Trainings, especially led by skilled facilitators who create a non judgmental atmosphere, can open eyes. It's important that such trainings also cover unconscious bias, since microaggressions often spring from these hidden biases. The goal is to move people from defensiveness, I didn't mean it that way, to understanding. Ah, I see why that could hurt someone, even if I didn't intend it. As one source suggests, give examples and explain the impact, not just the theory. And remember, training shouldn't be a one and done checkbox. It needs reinforcement and ideally integration into onboarding for new hires. On an individual level, a great practice is to reflect on your own biases and assumptions regularly. Encourage employees, especially managers and anybody in a leadership position, to ask themselves questions like this. When I give feedback or make offhand comments, do I speak differently to people depending on their gender or background? Or have I assumed something about a colleague, like their abilities or interests, because of their identity? Even diversity champions have blind spots. By normalizing self audits of our behavior, we make it more likely we'll catch ourselves before a microaggression slips out. Some companies include prompts in management training, like think of the last few people you praised. What did you praise them for? And did any patterns emerge related to identity? This can reveal, say, that one is consistently noting women's politeness, but men's leadership, a telling pattern to address. Leaders, in particular, should be encouraged to do this work. As the saying goes, the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. If a manager isn't aware of their own microaggressions or ignores those happening on their team, they're effectively setting a low bar for respect. Conversely, leaders who educate themselves and openly acknowledge these issues set a powerful example. Leaders must educate themselves on these issues to create inclusive workplaces where underrepresented groups feel valued. One research review emphasized it starts at the top. Fostering open dialogue and safe reporting. One of the hardest things for an employee to do is speak up about a microaggression, especially to the person who committed it. Fear of retaliation or simply fear of awkwardness can keep people silent. Organizations should therefore create multiple channels for reporting or discussing microaggressions. This can include formal avenues like an HR hotline or a bias incident reporting system, and informal ones like peer support groups or designated D&I champions within departments who are trained to handle these conversations. HR's role is crucial here. When someone comes forward with a concern that my supervisor keeps making comments about my accent that make me feel uncomfortable, that report must be taken seriously, not dismissed as oversensitivity. Investigating microaggressions can be tricky, but at a minimum, HR can talk to the parties, gather contacts, and if a pattern emerges, facilitate a resolution. Anything from coaching the microaggressor to moving the employee if they desire, to disciplinary action in repeated or great egregious cases. Also, consider anonymous climate surveys that include questions about microaggressions. Sometimes you'll uncover that, say, 40% of minority employees feel they have to work harder to prove themselves because of subtle comments. That data is gold for pinpointing issues and measuring improvement over time. The burden of calling out microaggressions shouldn't only fall on the victims. Allies, colleagues who witness something can play a huge role in stopping microaggressions in their tracks. We should encourage a culture where if you hear something off, you politely speak up. For example, if in a meeting someone makes a joke that lands wrong, perhaps, haha, we should get John to do the presentation. You know, Asians are good at tech stuff. A coworker should interject with a calm, I don't think that stereotype is appropriate. John's good because he's trained in the area, not because he's Asian. This does two things. It addresses the comment, and it shows the person who was targeted that others have their back. Of course, it takes some courage to be the one to speak up. HR and team leaders can help by explicitly empowering bystanders. Even running scenario-based exercises are role-playing and training. One tip from experts, bystander intervention doesn't have to be confrontational. It can be simple as a confused, what do you mean by that? To make the speaker reflect and possibly course correct. The key is not remaining passive. As one blog advised, if a friend uses gay as a synonym for stupid, resist the inclination to be passive. Provide feedback and educate. By doing so, you are providing a voice to a marginalized group. This holds in the workplace too. Your respectful challenge of a microaggression is a voice for inclusion. Another interesting strategy from the realm of organizational psychology and positive leadership is promoting micro affirmations. These are the opposite of microaggressions, small acts of inclusion and kindness that make people feel seen and appreciated. Examples include deliberately acknowledging a good idea that a quieter team member offered, praising a coworker's effort in detail, or taking time to mentor someone from an underrepresented group. While micro affirmations don't cancel out microaggressions, they help create a more positive atmosphere that can buffer the negative effects of unavoidable slights. Think of them as deposits in the emotional bank account to counter all the withdrawals. For example, telling a colleague, I noticed you handled that client call really well under pressure. Thank you for doing that. Is a micro affirmation. It's specific, personal, and positive. It might seem unrelated to bias, but in a workplace where micro affirmations are common, everyone feels more valued, which makes it easier to call out and correct the occasional negative incident. Researchers note that micro affirmations, like recognizing others' contributions, active listening, and validating someone's feelings, can build self esteem and combat the negative effects of microaggressions. Leaders can model this by simple habits. Start team meetings with a shout out for good work, or make sure to rotate who gets to present in high profile meetings so it's not always the same in crowd. These may seem like small gestures, but remember, micro works in both directions. Small bad things harm, and small good things heal. And if you commit a microaggression, own it and apologize. Because let's face it, none of us are perfect. Odds are at some point you will be the one who says or does something that offends a coworker, despite your best intentions. How you respond in that moment is critical. The worst thing to do is dismiss the person's reaction. Relax, I was joking. Or get defensive. I'm not sexist. I didn't mean it that way. That just adds a second layer of harm by invalidating their feelings. Instead, best practice from both conflict resolution and basic human decency is listen, acknowledge, apologize, learn. If someone points out a microaggression to you or you realize it yourself, a simple, sincere apology can go a long way. I'm sorry. I realize that comment wasn't sensitive. Thank you for telling me. It won't happen again. It might sting your ego for a second, but it earns you respect in the long run. As one workplace guide advises, own up to it and immediately apologize. Recognize harmful statements and correct them. After apologizing, make sure you don't repeat the behavior and perhaps do a bit of homework. If you call someone by the wrong name repeatedly, learn it properly. If you made an assumption about someone's background, learn more about them as an individual. Then move on without awkwardness. Show through your actions you've grown. This creates a culture where mistakes are opportunities for growth rather than shame. Importantly, managers should especially model this. When a boss says, I'm sorry, I learned something today, it normalizes humility and improvement. From an organizational perspective, leaders in HR should bake microaggression awareness and prevention into the company's DNA. We're responsible for setting the tone and policy. This means updating policy and codes of conduct to explicitly mention that subtle biases and derogatory comments are against our values. It also means ensuring diversity and inclusion efforts go beyond recruitment into day-to-day retention and culture. Some companies have started doing microaggression training as part of a broader DEI initiative. For example, Starbucks famously shut down stores for a day for bias training after a high-profile incident. While training alone isn't a way to correct this, and studies have shown mandatory training can backfire by causing defensiveness if not done thoughtfully, it can be valuable if combined with a larger strategy, one that includes accountability. Managers should know that how inclusive their team environment is will reflect in their performance reviews. HR can track metrics from exit interviews or surveys that relate to microaggressions. For example, in the past month, did you experience any comments or actions that made you feel uncomfortable about your identity? If patterns are spotted in a particular department, say multiple people reporting issues on Team X, that's a flag to intervene with extra coaching or personnel changes. It might also be wise to utilize tools. One paper suggests checklists, dashboards, and performance tracking for DEI goals, which can include reducing microaggressions. For instance, an internal dashboard might track the number of managers who've completed advanced inclusion training or whether key employee resource groups feel their concerns are heard. The point is to make inclusion measurable and actionable so that lofty values translate into everyday practice. Despite our prevention efforts, microaggressions will occur. How we handle them post incident is key. In some cases, a one on one conversation, facilitated by a mediator or coach if needed, between the microaggressor and the impacted person can be healing. This needs to be voluntary and handled sensitively. You never want to force someone to face an offender if they're not ready. But if both parties are willing, a structured dialogue can lead to mutual understanding. The person who committed the microaggression gets to hear firsthand about the impact of their actions, which is often an eye opener. And the person who was hurt gets a chance to be heard and perhaps even receive an apology. Ground rules, very important. No interrupting. Assume good intent. Focus on impact. These should always be set before the conversation takes place. Some organizations use professional coaches or ombudsmen to guide these conversations. An example of a positive outcome. In a tech firm, a team lead unintentionally kept mispronouncing an employee's African name in a meeting, and sometimes even joking about how exotic it was. The employee felt disrespected, but didn't know how to bring it up to the senior person. HR arranged a mediated chat where the employee expressed why it was hurtful, and the team lead genuinely apologized, even practicing the correct pronunciation. From then on, not only did the behavior stop, but the team lead became more vocal, ensuring other unique names were respected, effectively turning from perpetrator to ally. This reinforces what the MIT research suggests. When handled well, such conflicts can provide opportunities to restore relationships and even strengthen them. Finally, the long-term answer to microaggressions is building a truly inclusive culture. This means not just reacting to bad behavior, but proactively celebrating diversity and fostering belonging. Encourage mentorship programs across differences. A senior leader meeting and mentoring an up-and-coming employee of a different background, for example. This breaks down stereotypes by building one-on-one relationships. Support employee resource groups and give them a voice in company decisions so that culturally insensitive missteps, like scheduling that all-staff meeting on a major religious holiday, in an earlier case, it can be caught and avoided. Or better yet, never occur because someone at the table will say, hey, maybe not that date. Incorporate inclusion into your leadership development. Let's train future leaders into a cultural competency and reward managers who build diverse, successful teams. Promoting a mindset of continuous learning as society's conversations about identity evolve, so will understanding of microaggressions. What was not on the radar 10 years ago, for example, pronoun usage for non-binary colleagues, may be front and center now. Organizations should stay updated. Maybe have a D&I counsel or consultant refresh your training content periodically and encourage employees to stay curious and empathetic. To sum this all up, tackling microaggressions requires action at multiple levels: individual mindfulness, interpersonal courage and empathy, and organizational commitment. The best practices from HR, psychology, and leadership fields all point to the same underlying solution: make respect and inclusion a daily practice, not just a slogan. When you do that, microaggressions have less room to fester. And when they do occur, an inclusive culture is resilient. It can address the issue, support the person hurt, educate the person who erred, and move forward stronger. As we wrap up, it's useful to turn knowledge into personal insight and action. Whether you're a leader, an HR professional, a team coach, or just someone trying to be a better coworker, here are some coaching prompts and reflection questions to ponder. You can use these for self-reflection, journaling, or even team discussion starters. They're designed to help you and your organization move from awareness to concrete steps. For personal reflection, think about a time you experienced a microaggression. What was said or done, and how did it make you feel? Did you respond at the time or afterwards? What, if anything, do you wish you had done differently? This question will help you process your own experience and consider how you might empower yourself in the future. Building empathy. Recall a time you witnessed someone else being subtly disrespected or stereotyped at work. What did you do in that moment? If faced with a similar situation now, how might you intervene or support the person? This prompt will encourage considering your role as a bystander or ally and how to translate good intentions into action. Check your biases. Ask yourself, have I ever said or done something at work that might have been a microaggression? Be honest with yourself. Most of us can think of at least one cringe moment. What did I learn from it, and have I changed my behavior since? If you're not sure, you might even ask a trusted colleague if they notice any blind spots you have. This will help identify areas for personal growth in a spirit of self-improvement, not guilt. Team dynamics. Look around your team meetings and interaction. Who tends to get interrupted or overlooked? Who does the interrupting? Are ideas acknowledged equally regardless of who offers them? If you're a manager, whose feedback do you tend to favor? If you notice a pattern, for example, a junior woman being interrupted more, brainstorm one change to implement, like a meeting rule that everyone speaks without interruption, or actively inviting input from quieter members. This question moves from observation to action in improving group dynamics. Policy and culture check. This is really for HR and other leaders. What mechanisms does my organization have for employees to safely voice concerns about subtle bias or microaggressions? If an employee came to me tomorrow with a complaint, do I know how to handle it? Are managers equipped to have those tough conversations? This role reflection on these can highlight if you need to put better processes or training in place. If the answer is I'm not sure, that's your action item to get sure. Commitment to microaffirmations. Identify one microaffirmation you can practice in the next week. Who is someone on your team or peer group that you can make an effort to encourage or acknowledge in a genuine way? Perhaps it's praising a colleague's recent effort that went unsung, or making a point to ask the quiet person in the room for their thoughts in the next discussion. Write it down and do it. Notice the impact it has on them and on you. Learning and growth. What's one aspect of diversity or inclusion I know the least about? Maybe you're comfortable with gender and race topics, but unfamiliar with disability inclusion. Commit to educating yourself a bit more on that. It could be reading an article, attending a workshop, or having a conversation with someone who has that life experience, if they're willing. This keeps you on the path of continuous learning. It's essential for keeping those microaggressions at bay as society evolves. Use these prompts as a mirror and a map. They can reveal where you are individually or as an organization, and it might unknowingly contribute to a less than ideal environment, and it can guide you towards specific improvements. In conclusion, microaggressions may be micro in name, but as we've discussed, their impact is anything but small. The good news is that by shining a light on these subtle acts of exclusion, we can begin to disarm them. It starts with awareness, seeing the problem for what it is, and then it takes empathy, courage, and consistency to address it. For HR and leaders, it's about setting policies and examples that make it clear respect is a norm and slights are not okay, even the tiny ones. For each of us as individuals, it's about being open to feedback, willing to change, and ready to speak up for ourselves and others. Creating a truly inclusive workplace is a journey, one that will have its awkward moments and learning curves, but it's also immensely rewarding. When people feel safe and valued, they bring their best selves to work. And that means better teamwork, more innovation, and a stronger organization. Plus, it's just the right thing to do if we care about our colleagues as fellow human beings. So, let's all commit to being a bit more mindful of our words and actions. Let's replace those paper cuts with handshakes, our fist bumps, our respectful nods. Choose your comfort. And if you catch a microaggression happening, whether you're dishing it out or on the receiving end, remember that it's an opportunity to educate, to set a boundary, to initiate a conversation, maybe even to deepen a relationship. With professional resolve and a dash of wit to keep us sane, we can coach ourselves and each other toward a workplace culture where everyone has the freedom to contribute without weighing which part of themselves might become a target today. Thank you for joining this deep dive into workplace microaggressions. It's a tough topic, but awareness is the first step to change. Hopefully, you're walking away with both insights and practical tips to make your workplace a little more respectful and a lot more inclusive. Now, let's go turn those insights into action. One small step and one less microaggression at a time.